Camp Here and There, the audio experience? Look, I'm not super familiar with it, and I only know about it because garbageGothic is involved, which I expect to be the case for most of you in the audience. However, my goal is to celebrate all corners of the community, and projects involving community members should fall under that, loosely. I am Professor G, and today I'm going to be taking a look at and writing a comprehensive review and recap of every episode of Camp Here and There. Anyways, to be clear of what the goal is, I'm going to listen to every episode as well as reading the transcript because despite being better than a majority of non-English centric speakers, hell, even some English-only speakers, I still need to read words to be able to hear them sometimes. Rap battles are so much fun for me. I will be giving you a short plot summary, as well as my thoughts on the episodes and predictions and whatever. That's right, this script is being written in real time, except for that previous line where I wrote out what my process is, and also that line, and also that line, but not this next one. All of these should lead to two goals. 1, tell the episode-to-episode story of Camp Here and There. 2, give you a central list of episodes to check out for whatever purpose you may need. Without further ado, let's get into it. Well, not exactly get into it now, as I'm writing the script. I'm currently on a plane. The series open was just the sexiest narrator I've heard in a while, and then the banger of a theme song kicks in. Stop, we already heard it earlier. We are introduced to Sydney Sargent, played by one of the writers, Mayfield. He seems to be a pretty active and upbeat nurse working at Camp Here and There, and he also does announcements before the meals. We get to listen to 3 that he does on the very first day of camp. In these announcements, we are introduced to a couple characters, one being Jedediah Martin, who sounds like someone doing a Michael Cera impression on SNL. We also meet Lucille, our seemingly jaded camp director, as well as Chef Matthew and Joshua and Marisol, who are counselors at the camp. The main plot of the episode is about the pink elephant man who lurks around the camp but is never in it. He gave Marisol a weird sense of impulse, as well as blurring around the edges of her vision. This information is given to Sydney to announce before one of the meals, but Marisol never told anyone about it. Jedediah thinks it's a prank by Joshua, but it's confirmed by Sydney later that the elephant man is real when he shows up at Sydney's study, ate a bunch of Sydney's worms, and took away Sydney's sense of impulse before leaving. The following convo between Sydney and Jedediah implies that something is changing between their personalities ever so slightly, though we never really get an explanation to what that change is within the episode. As for the episode as a whole, I think a lot of the writing and jokes are very on the nose and blunt, but in a good way. Mayfield plays the character of Sydney in a way that feels very real. It feels like he's reading off a script when he does these morning announcements, but not in a bad, awkward way. In fact, dare I say, it sounds very sincere and natural with certain line deliveries. The script also plays with a lot of supernatural elements with a camp that is secretly radioactive and isn't following the rules of time. I think the best way to recap the style of the episode and maybe the show as a whole is to play this very obvious bit of foreshadowing in one of Sydney's announcements.
Did any of you know in my senior year of high school I was voted most likely to get killed of consequence of reckless thirst for forbidden knowledge? To this day, I take pride in that title. And you can take comfort in it, campers, knowing that I'll get to the bottom of this if it's the last thing I do.
And that's just the first episode. I promise to make a lot of these later recaps and reviews a lot shorter and easier to follow. Granted, this is going to be the first time we're learning a lot of this info, so I'll likely talk about that, but I'll try to keep everything short and concise and only exactly what you need to know. The camp has been overrun by penguins. They've hidden in the vents, taken Sydney's worms, and even kidnapped him. their leader Maurice threatening to wage all-out war. The only way Sydney stops the war is by promising the penguins a weekly supply of salmon. Jedediah is missing until he shows up later, claiming to work on some secret project and showing some relatively uncharacteristic concern when Sydney mentions that he got kidnapped by penguins. There's also a heartfelt moment where Sydney talks about opening up and how he feels so much more comfortable saying his words out loud instead of writing them. Episode 3 has Rowan, a counselor who's able to tell the weather by sniffing and eating it. And he warns Sydney that a terrible fate is approaching the camp. Just kidding, it turns out to be Chef Matthew's apocalypse soup instead. Sydney's late night journal has another bit of excellent writing that makes this world feel really down to earth and lived in. And then the Elephant Man is back! Sydney thought it could just be a manic break or hallucinations, but there are very real effects to the Elephant Man's presence. So he is, for lack of a better word, absolutely real. Episode 4 sees the Gravedigger's visiting camp, a witch that does reanimation. It's not quite the same as bringing the dead back to life, though. Sydney does hint at the idea of taking someone to the death fields where the witch's magic is to create a more permanent return, but Jedediah promptly cuts him off. After the Gravediggeress leaves, a counselor named Soren Baltimore goes missing. Lucille and Sydney find him kneeling at the outer edge of the death fields, the witch tempting him to enter, but they snap him out of it. He remains silent for the time being. On to episode 5. It's not opposite day at camp here and there, and all the regular antics that come with such a day are not happening at all. Sounds annoying? It was. While Jedediah is cringing at the thought of doing the morning announcements, he stumbles on through, and Sydney is absolutely enjoying it. This does lead to opposite day being cancelled within the camp due to too many people getting hurt and many getting close to death. Outside of that, this episode is pretty easy going, and I don't know if the show wants me to think that there's more to Sydney and Jedediah's relationship, but it seems like there absolutely is. In episode 6, we learned that the culprit behind some recently stolen items within the camp is the Elephant Man. Sydney catches him in the act, but he enacts his powers to take away Sydney's willpower before Marisol can step in because of their increased sense of will. The stolen items all seem to be connected in that they're loosely related to magic. The late night journal sees Sydney and Jedediah not seeing eye to eye on how much of a threat the Elephant Man is, and the episode ends on a weirdly sour mood. Luckily, episode 7 is a lighter one, way lighter. There's a goo on the all-knowing fire pit, which reduces Sydney to as much of a sneezing and sniffling mess as me writing this recap with COVID. The pile of goo grows very large and is able to move before the staff discovers that it is strengthened on love and weakened by hate. So they get the campers to say slurs at it. This is a joke, they just bullied the goo. We also get more building on Sydney and Jedediah's relationship, and the episode ends on a much lighter note. It was at this point in time that I had healed from COVID. Unfortunately, this meant that I had to go back to school and catch up on work and all that. But luckily, after some exams, essays, and a bunch of whatever, I am on winter break. So, my little campers, let's keep going. Simply, nothing could go wrong. Episode 8 begins with 2 New York-style delivery men, one of which is voiced by Gianni Montegrano, who is the narrator you hear at the start of every episode. They have a package of illegal contraband for Jedediah, but they hand it off to Sydney. Jedediah gets the better of Sydney later, so all we really learn is that the project Jedediah is working on involving this package is highly dangerous. And later he regains the package at Lucille's command. The nightly diary goes over a lot, such as the package and why Sydney thinks it's dangerous, as well as more development on Sydney and Jedediah's relationship. I recommend listening to this part in full. It deserves more than what I can give in this recap. Luckily, episode 9 dials things right back down again. We get to see a change of pace as Jedediah is the tape recorder, and he covers a conflict mediation meeting between counselors Joshua and Yvonne. And look at that! Counselor Yvonne is voiced by our good friend garbageGothic, aka Emily Sofko. We see an argument between Joshua and Yvonne over whether a different counselor named Juniper should get to stay with Joshua's cabin anymore. Over a real long talk, including stuff about alpha males, we reach the conclusion that Joshua is just feeling disliked by the kids in his cabin, and also Yvonne. Again, this episode is just a good change of pace. It's a really nice, light, and fun one compared to the previous one that was a lot heavier. I actually really love episode 10, so I am going to give myself double the words to talk about it. Here we learn that while Jedediah was dealing with Joshua and Yvonne, Sydney was dealing with wartime politics. Cabin Dung Beetle doesn't want to clean the cafeteria anymore, so they're starting a full-on revolution against the camp. Chaos soon unfolds as they go full-on riot, and Lucille threatens a no-dinner policy. The camp is split into 3 factions: the Loyalists, who want dinner, the Seditionists, who want fair governance, and Lucille, who has a flamethrower. Ultimately, Jedediah comes to the rescue with a peace treaty which helps the campers, which is why unions work! There's a bit of foreshadowing when we're told that Counselor Sorn finally has all the stones he needs, a regular quest in previous episodes. During Sydney's nightly diary, we also learned that he suggested the same peace treaty to Lucille as the one that Jedediah ended up giving. Even stranger, he's still seeing the Elephant Man. The Elephant Man actually doesn't seem to be that hostile or anything, but Sydney still gets a really bad feeling about him. This episode's actually surprisingly funny. I got a good chuckle out of hearing the music that plays while Sydney's talking about the revolution. I honestly recommend checking this whole episode out yourselves. It's funny even outside of the context of the show, and me giving it 200 words in a recap isn't going to do it justice. In fact, I think this might be my favorite episode of the show so far. It combines all my favorite elements of Camp Here and There into one package. And that was episode 10. It was at this point I shared the script with garbageGothic so that she could help me review it for this lecture. She told me that I was writing too much for each recap, so I had to go back and shorten almost everything. During this time, I actually went back to my home country to visit my family for the holidays, and they can be a lot as well. I had to do like 10 college applications and stuff, and drop out of my AP Computer Science course, which I already took before in 10th grade. So I was just doing this again to refresh my knowledge. So it doesn't matter too much, but you know. Surprise, surprise, I'm not great with completing long-term goals that I need to maintain interest in. You know, things that take me a long stretch of time to do. I need something that connects me to them somehow. Episode 11 of Camp. Episode 11 of Camp Here and There is about a tower building contest that Sydney holds for everyone to try to bring everyone together after episode 10 that quickly turns sour as the staff goes full tryhard. Cabin Dung Beetle ends up winning by using magic on their tower before it disappears. This all leads to Sydney having a breakdown over how hard he tries to make everyone happy and how he feels like Jedediah doesn't actually love him. And then the Elephant Man. It all feels like a real straw broke the camel's back moment, and Mayfield delivers maybe the best performance that I've seen yet in the entire show. Episode 12 starts with Sydney talking about their childhood and how rough it was, which connects to the opening where in the static before the intro, you can hear a talk about children. That whole thing in the static is also new to the show. As for the plot of the episode, Sydney has taken the misbehaving counselors from episode 11 and taken them on a team building trip with Counselor Olympics, including Jedediah. But Lucille quickly has Sydney turn all the competitions to torture for Jedediah. And when Sydney goes to confront Lucille about this, what happens is what the comments can only refer to as gaslighting. Also, my prediction about Soren from episode 10 may actually hold some weight. And once again, I'm right, because episode 13 has Soren break in during the morning announcements to encourage the children to follow him and watch as he resurrects a dead bunny back to life using his stone statue and the power of the Mother of Stones. Even though no one ends up following him, he does succeed in reviving the dead bunny. Sort of. It's more like a puppet on a string, if anything. The Elephant Man makes an appearance and is unable to affect the bunny. Jedediah and Lucille have a talk, and Sydney is still trying to grasp on to everything that's going on. There's more very real writing about the need for affirmation. Episode 14 sees Juniper, a Brit counselor, hop by morning announcements to talk about the bathroom situation at the camp, though this barely matters to the episode as a whole. What we do get out of it is Sydney trying to sing, as well as the staff confronting Sydney about how much he overshares during his announcements. Elephant Man's here and he's scared the kids away from cleaning the bathroom, so the staff chooses to punish Sydney by having him clean the bathrooms instead, and Marisol joins in. Sydney also seems to be a bit more jaded about Jedediah, almost as if he doesn't want to care about Jedediah anymore. Also, there's an Arthur meme reference in this episode. I just didn't know when to mention that, but that also happens here. Episode 15 is another mediation tape with Jedediah. This time it's between counselors Marisol and Salem, who are also dating. Their little tiff is over the Elephant Man and how his presence has changed the camp. Marisol thinks that the Elephant Man is a very real threat that should be dealt with as soon as possible. Salem and Jedediah, to an extent, don't see why Sydney and Marisol are so afraid of the Elephant Man. This also extends into a conversation about Sydney's behavior, and the episode ends on everyone agreeing that the Elephant Man should be dealt with and that maybe Sydney should be less open with the kids. Episode 16 has everyone feeling lazy, time itself feeling slowed down. The Elephant Man's even affected. Sydney takes this time to talk about 2 dreams he had, one of which seems like it could be in our real world. That makes it seem like Camp Here and There could be some sort of weird coma dream thing, but who knows? Jedediah brings everyone back up to speed. And turns out time itself could have been paused forever if he didn't fix a clock on his wall. As for Elephant Man, he visits Sydney later, but is freaked out by a power outage while staring into a window and runs away screaming. I actually like this episode's sound design a lot. A lot of the music is slowed in a sort of creepy but sleepy way. Episode 17 is about Lake Day at the camp, and Jedediah is supposed to make an appearance because he loves swimming. But that doesn't end up happening. What does end up appearing are a bunch of bees that sting the lifeguards, and say it with me now, the Elephant Man! And the Elephant Man causes enough fear and chaos that eventually the events of Lake Day are cancelled. But it seems as if Sydney is growing more jaded at dealing with the Pink Menace, because when Jedediah shows up extremely concerned that he saw the Elephant Man grabbing at his journal, Sydney just really wants to use as an opportunity to tell Jedediah to go talk to Lucille about the Elephant Man instead. Holy shit, episode 18 is another big one. I'll try to go over everything as best as I can, but there's a lot of info to go through here. The A-plot is that the campers have found a weird hive on the lake as they're trying to finish up the events of Lake Day from the previous episode. This hive has a weird mental effect that creates fear and distress the closer that you get to it. The campers grow interested, but the staff are frightful as the effects begin to intensify. Rowan is able to push the hive into the campfire before we learned that it was essentially an egg for a queen bee and that children's energy help it grow and adults are like poison to it. Sydney runs us through a couple of occasions where he and Jedediah played house as kids, a consistent theme being that Jedediah would never feed or even take care of the animals and pets that they kept as their children, and they would die as a result. What's weird is that Jedediah would be really affected by these deaths, even though he essentially deprived them. There's likely some connection between that and how Jedediah treats Sydney, even though he does seem to want to help Sydney as he goes to see Lucille about the Elephant Man. But here are the twists. Number 1, Jedediah only goes to see Lucille about the Elephant Man now because the Elephant Man went for his journal, which Jedediah says if the Elephant Man got access to, Sydney would definitely be in danger. Number 2 is that Sydney may already be in grave danger, as Jedediah makes reference to keeping Sydney alive for one more day, and that the investigation of the camp may affect Sydney. Number 3, Lucille has known about the Elephant Man for some time, but truly doesn't see him as a threat. But what may be the biggest twist of all is that Lucille is actually Jedediah's mother, which correlates with an earlier story about Sydney living with Jedediah and Lucille. Episode 19 is also pretty heavy, but less so than the last one. There are weeds growing in the camp, and Sydney wants to keep everything clean, but he's busy taking a crew out to destroy Jedediah's mother's stone thing, since it's still reviving dead animals somehow. Unfortunately, during that time, the weeds grow into a barrier that locks Sydney's crew outside and the Tony's delivery men inside. Find out that Lucille has a secret plant growing that's so important that she threatened to starve the campers if they messed with it. And as it turns out, a camper was just holding on to an acorn, which is what made the trees angry and grow that barrier. And 2 additional bits of information is that Sydney felt very weird and disoriented while trapped outside for some reason, as well as Jedediah bringing a safe for his journal into the camp. During Sydney's night diary, we learn that he thinks that the Elephant Man hasn't been dealt with at all, before Jedediah walks in and we had a very painful and awkward convo between the two. The episode ends with Jedediah trying to make a tape to talk about his feelings with Sydney, before learning that Sydney has apparently disappeared and gone missing, in order to make his tape about the Elephant Man somewhere else. Episode 20 is a conflict mediation tape led by Jedediah, though he obviously wants to get this one over with. It's between Rowan and Juniper. Rowan upset that Juniper has ditched his job of delivering fish to the penguins twice now. We also get some more lore that apparently Lucille and Sydney stay at the camp year-round. While this episode is largely uneventful, it does give us a moment of Jedediah having a Freudian slip that he realizes that how he acts gives Sydney the idea that he doesn't give a shit about him, and we get an honest conversation about what actions versus words mean. Episode 21 gives us a couple things, such as Yvonne doing the morning announcements and being completely unable to read Sydney's handwriting. We get more concern from Jedediah and the search party, but most importantly, we find out where Sydney is. Sydney is currently outside of campgrounds trying to look for the Elephant Man, after the Elephant Man extended an offer to explain everything to Sydney, one that Sydney is taking him up on, but he's currently a bit lost in the forest trying to find him. He spends the time talking about how he left his mother's home because he wasn't getting adequate attention, something that he feels is repeating with Jedediah, which is why he's taking the Elephant Man up on his offer at all. The episode ends with Sydney claiming that he's in hell now. This episode actually has some pretty creepy moments that I actually really liked. In episode 22, we finally meet the Elephant Man, who claims that he is a prophet and that he loves Sydney. He claims that no one sees Sydney for what he truly is, and gives us a good old-fashioned case of love bombing. But beyond that, he needs Sydney to steal Jedediah's diary, and seems to get angry at the mention of Jedediah's name at all. He also reveals that his real name is Elijah, and his voice actor gives a creepy yet charming vibe to his performance. So Elijah sends Sydney right back to camp with a bunch of the stolen stuff, and Joshua and Yvonne are the first to notice. Upon Sydney's return, he promptly apologizes for his absence and claims that he just fell asleep due to some flower, though during his night diary, Jedediah reunites with Sydney and promptly picks that lie apart. Their relationship is more strained than ever now, as Jedediah can't explain why he suddenly sees the Elephant Man as a threat, and Sydney, under the Elephant Man's influence, has completely gone against Jedediah. The episode ends with Jedediah confirming to himself that Sydney has met with the Elephant Man and walking away. And with that, we are in the final third of the show. Oh god, there's still a whole third of the show left. I haven't even talked about how there's a change in the radio static at the start of every new episode now. That has something to do with the episode usually. or there's amazing transitional music and background music by Will Wood, or the fact that garbageGothic does sound mixing for the episodes, or how every time someone mentions the time, there's a hint of static in the background. Alright, this might not be perfect, but I'm going to try to speedrun the rest of these episodes and shorten my recaps down to 50 words from like roughly 100 before. Not that that probably matters to you guys. I mean, I'm saying all this stuff, but you know, I don't think the FRB community is gonna have much use with the fact that the title of the previous episode plays into the next one, or that the Elephant Man apparently has a moderately fat ass. It's on the wiki. I'm just gonna finish this because I'm too far in now, and so I need to do this. Episode 23 is about a deadly mold that grows in the camp. Turns out this mold is being grown by Soren, who just escaped his lockdown. The grave diggeress comes back, not that you remember who that is, and she gives Sydney the solution to beat the mold. Episode 24 is the shortest one of the series, runtime just under 12 minutes. This one doesn't matter. Sydney's in a mediation meeting this time, and it's pretty well acted, I guess. Episode 25, there's a group called The Hunt. It's trying to kill a literal silver fox that Sydney wants to protect. It turns out the fox likes the weird, crazy hunters. We get hints of Sydney and Jedediah before the show began. Episode 26, there's a time loop caused by a magic wall, and Joshua is something. Sydney finally tries stealing Jedediah's journals, but gets caught, and an argument breaks out between the two, which leads to Jedediah hiding the journals again. The outro music's different and cool on this one. Episode 28, there's creepy clock sounds in the intro. In fact, the whole episode's kind of creepy. I didn't really get it, though. Emily had to tell me that this one's about the clock of meantime, which is a clock that tells Jedediah whenever something big is about to happen, which he figured out from his father's death. Also, Sydney and Elijah meet again. Episode 28, a man from Sydney's dreams that we heard about in episode 16, says that his name is Up and Adam, apparently. And then he tells Sydney that the journals are in the tunnels from episode 2. And Sydney goes down to the tunnels to grab the journal, and the episode ends with him freaking out randomly. I actually thought the part with Sydney in the tunnel was pretty funny. Episode 29 talks about why Elijah is doing what he's doing, and he hints at the fact that Jedediah has brought Sydney back to life and that he foolishly eliminated death from the world. This freaks Sydney enough that at the end of the episode, it seems that he's on good terms with Jedediah again. With that, we are in the final 5 episodes now. So let's just speed through the rest, and I will be able to give you a full recap of... a correct recap. A strong... whatever. I'll be able to... I need to take a step back. Hey Ghost Recorder, aka phone, I'm recording my thoughts in. I feel bad. I'm running out of the time in the studio to film and I can't afford to book another day, so I need to get this done. But at what cost? I began research for this project as a way to escape my real life, my real stressful world, and dive into a quirky fictional one. But it's now trapped me too. I shouldn't do this if I don't enjoy it, I guess. I let my need to show my knowledge and research overshadow the amazing world built by the creators and everyone who worked on this project. The fantastic acting and writing and sound design, all for some speed review of an experience I'm not even sure I can give the true vibes of. I should cherish these episodes and this world more. Show that it's worth the time of people to check out. Because I care. There are 5 episodes left in the show. They're all likely very important, so against my better judgment, I am going to talk about them in length for as long as I think I need to. If this bores you, if it disinterests you, that's fine. But I'm doing this for the people who do care. So, before we get into episode 30, let's discuss some possible theories, shall we? So, is Sydney actually dead? That's one of the questions we have leading up here. Elijah implies that Sydney has or will have been brought back to life at some point. And again, Jedediah talks this whole thing about keeping Sydney alive for one more day. So that's pretty possible. Lucille might be trying to get something out of all of this because she's obviously ignoring the Elephant Man and Sydney's needs. And she's, always pushing Jedediah, which of course is his mother, so that makes sense, I guess. But maybe there's some bigger goal to that, or maybe this is all just some weird cobra dream, like I said it was. Whatever it is, we're about to find out. So, without further ado, let's get into episode 30. Episode 30 opens with Blue Mayfield, the creator of the series, talking about Camp Lilac, a camp for transgender and non-gender conforming kids from ages 12 to 17 in Ohio. This is a real life camp, and this doesn't have much to do with the show other than possibly influencing it, but I actually thought I would give this information to you viewers at home as well if you wanted to go there. We start with seems like another mediation session with Yvonne and Joshua. This time they're disagreeing about how to deal with the Elephant Man. But as it turns out, this is actually just an excuse so that Yvonne and Joshua could talk to Jedediah because they are concerned about his and Sydney's current state. We get a quick run through of the info that Jedediah has of Sydney, and surprise, surprise, he doesn't really know what Sydney's been up to. We then dive into the past that Sydney, Joshua, Yvonne, and Jedediah all shared in college, which includes some joke about the Skyrim soundtrack being something that Jedediah danced to. This leads to Jedediah explaining why he feels the need to protect Sydney as much as he does, in what may be the best acting performance in the entire show. You truly get a sense of how helpless Sydney is, but how it isn't really his fault, but that he can still take a toll on others' mental health because of it. It's all very well expressed. However, this is cut short because the motherfucking Elephant Man is here. That's right, he's gathered a group of campers using his powers and claimed that tomorrow night, their muse, that's Sydney, will be praised in a ceremony that's surely no good, before leading everyone in a chant of our muse, using voices from fans of the series, including Meta Machine. This episode gets intense fast and is honestly one of the best acted ones in the entire show. The outro music is somehow both funky and foreboding. It's actually been changing throughout the past few episodes, but I've neglected to mention it. But this episode really sets up how climactic the finale is going to be. Episode 31 has Sydney confirming to the campers that what happened in the previous episode was real, and warning them not to trust and follow the Elephant Man no matter what he says or does. He also says that he will not be leaving camp for the rest of the summer, at least under his own volition. Sydney and Jedediah finally talk about what happened, and Mayfield gives another amazing performance where he talks about how he felt fooled by the Elephant Man and his words. You truly understand what he went through. Jedediah also admits that he needs to help Sydney with his problems more openly now. The episode ends on one really simple phrase.
Sydney, at this point, what do I do?
Episode 8 opens with Sydney saying that the nurse's cabin is on lockdown due to, you guessed it, the Elephant Man. Sydney and Jedediah also seem to be on better terms now, as Jedediah openly confides in Sydney that a package is being delivered. Sydney also mentions that the members of Cabin Dung Beetle are taking items that the Elephant Man stole from them but returned to Sydney and throwing them into a fire. Later, during a different announcement, the Elephant Man shows up directly outside Sydney's window and begins using his powers as Sydney becomes more and more tired until Jedediah can come in and save him as the Elephant Man disappears. Though it appears, as things are all over, a camper from Cabin Dung Beetle releases some nightmare powder introduced in episode 28 into the campfire pit, which spreads mass hysteria. During this panic, Sydney runs outside to try to stop the camper, but it's too late. This is a trap set by the Elephant Man to draw out Sydney and capture him, which worked. The Elephant Man then uses his powers to make everyone else stop having nightmares, which gets them on his side. With that, he carries Sydney and takes everyone else outside of camp, except for Jedediah, who is unaffected by the Elephant Man's powers, and Lucille, because I don't know. The Toadies, aka the delivery men, show up and let Jedediah know what happened. There's a bit of trans comedy where they refer to Sydney as voluptuous and curvaceous to try to remind themselves of who Sydney is, and then pressuring Jedediah to agree with them before shaming him for it. But they do also give Jedediah his package, which is a small mirror which he's going to use to subdue the Elephant Man. This is because, if you remember, the Elephant Man was freaked out during that power outage when he was looking into the window, which Jedediah and Sydney think that he might be freaked out by his own reflection because he's using his own powers on himself then. So that's what he's going to try to do. Jedediah leaves a voicemail for Lucille, letting her know what happened and that he's taking a gun but doesn't intend to use it, and the mirror, which he does intend to use to save everyone from the Elephant Man. He also takes the time to set up a potential death message to Sydney and finally lets Sydney know that he loves him. And with that, we are now on to the two-part finale, which I'm still going to refer to as episode 33 and 34 because that's what the show does. The finale begins with the narrator voice of Gianni that we usually hear, which is how you know shit is going down. No, instead we get Elijah, again the Elephant Man, who has Sydney on a pyre, aka the tower that he stole from the campers during the tower building competition. He also has the rest of the camp there with him who help him set up a ritual, which involves reading Jedediah's journal. Speaking of which, Jedediah runs in and tries to stop the Elephant Man, but as the Elephant Man takes off his mask, Jedediah recognizes him. Before I can explain who the Elephant Man really is, we gotta skip ahead a bit, so bear with me here. Elijah tells Jedediah that he has betrayed his muse and lets us know that Sydney is dead for real. Or somewhat. Through his description, it seems that Sydney is brought back to life every summer, and then after every summer, Jedediah leaves Sydney's dead body here at the camp. Elijah begins reading Jedediah's journal and detains him as the ritual begins. The journal talks about Jedediah's experience with Sydney's death in 2018 and his process to bring Sydney back to life. The journal also describes a tall, lanky white man with blonde hair and perfect teeth. That man turns out to be the Elephant Man. He's been stalking Sydney for a while now, one time changing the schedule so that he would be the only nurse watching after Sydney for weeks when Sydney was in the hospital. But as Elijah keeps trying to read the journal, his powers become weakened, and so the staff and campers begin to doubt him. He tries to read a little bit more, but Sydney springs back up and pushes him off the pyre. Jedediah taking this opportunity to show him the mirror, and the Elephant Man uses his own powers against himself. Afterwards, everyone's back at the camp. Sydney wakes up after fainting, and Jedediah begins to explain everything about how Sydney's death was his fault, and that he couldn't get over the guilt, which is why he brought him back. He also explains that the journal has been burned, which might be a good thing, and also might not. Elijah was captured a bit, but then escaped and ran away. While Elijah was captured, Jedediah was trying to explain to him the details of Sydney's death, because supposedly everyone who comes in contact with this information dies later, Jedediah's father included. Sydney thinks it's a bit weird Jedediah is so willing to kill the Elephant Man. Jedediah disagrees. Sydney and Jedediah finally confirm to each other that they're in a relationship now and that they're dating in a heart-touching moment. And they agree to spend some more time with each other by playing cards to pass the time. And that is episode 33. The final episode is mostly a wrap-up, as Sydney wishes all the staff and campers well at the end of the summer. But we also get some news that the kids of Cabin Dung Beetle are still against everyone and have left to form their own new camp elsewhere. So I guess Season 2's villains are locked in. We end on a lengthy chess game between Lucille and Jedediah, where Lucille apologizes to Jedediah for not taking action sooner, and that she's proud of him. She also reveals that Elijah has been chasing Sydney for some time now, before Sydney and Elijah ever worked at Camp Here and There. This gives an idea that maybe Elijah was never actually a nurse, and that he only became one to stalk Sydney, and that Sydney might have actually died of malpractice and not of Jedediah's doing. But we never get an official answer to that. And that's the end of the series. What a long and weird journey for us, right, students? I'm really hoping that you guys check out the series in some capacity after this. I obviously will recommend it to you. And if you don't want to trudge your way through all 34 episodes, we gotta get to goal 2, where I will give you a short list of episodes to check out for whatever purpose you may want. Here are all the episodes that have to do with the central plot of Camp Here and There, the Elephant Man stuff. Here are the one-off episodes that require almost zero knowledge of Camp Here and There to check out. Here are the episodes focused on Sydney and Jedediah's relationship building. Here are all the episodes with great writing and acting in my opinion. And this list is long for a reason. The show's pretty good, guys. And if you're still the type of person who will only check this out because garbageGothic is involved, I have a list of episodes where Yvonne appears, and a separate list of episodes where Yvonne is mentioned, if you want to check that out. And of course, here are my top 5 episodes in order. This is as close of a recap to the whole series as I can give you, but I still absolutely recommend that you check it out. The work that Blue Mayfield and everyone else put in is absolutely phenomenal. If you can, please support the series on Patreon, or watch the episodes with ads, or even continue spreading the word of Camp Here and There. Trust me. With that being said, now that the Elephant Man is gone, and I have time for my own gamer hour again, there's only one final question to answer. Do I have to make an FRB versus anything out of this? Because, like, I could use Yvonne, you know, obviously get her to be voiced by Emily, who's, you know, the actual